Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass. Thank you for watching this Ag Forecast brought to you by Agrible, the makers of Morning Farm Report. Our software gives growers the insights to make the best decisions possible about their operations. Well, for many of us in the eastern part of the Corn Belt, we saw our first kind of taste of snow for the season. What you're looking at here is a map that shows the 72-hour snowfall accumulation ending early in the morning on the 30th. And we can see that a lot of places in Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, parts of Kentucky, and some of the higher country in West Virginia and parts of the Carolinas here saw some snow. Now, of course, the parts of Minnesota and Wisconsin have seen multiple rounds of snow so far this year, but some locations up here, as that last system went through and that colder air came diving down, have seen better than 6 inches. So this was a pretty good snowfall event for this region. So kind of keep you updated on what snowfall looks like moving throughout the season, because certainly last year was a year where we saw very, very little snowfall across a big section of the Corn Belt, and that was an important setup for our 2017 growing season. So we'll keep a close eye on this as winter goes along. Now, I know I have a lot of younger viewers that watch my videos, and so I think I better give them a trick-or-treat forecast. So what you just saw animating here is the next 3.5 days, so this gets us into Thursday in terms of precipitation. So let's kind of get things started off at the beginning. We have the remnants here late in the night on Sunday, getting into Monday morning, the remnants of Philippe moving into the northern, kind of northeastern part of the United States, dropping a lot of precipitation. What's going to be interesting is that the remnants of Philippe plus this little clipper that's coming down out of Alberta are going to team up together and move on off to the north and east. And we'll kind of see that as we move through here. So this is getting into early morning on Monday, the 30th. So as far as Corn Belt precipitation goes, we're going to have to deal with what's left kind of coming around the backside of that clipper on Monday. Kind of may be enhanced by some of the lakes bringing some snow showers and some very cold rain to parts of Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. A lot of this being enhanced again by the lake. What we can see as we move through, and also you saw there, let me step back, saw that parts of Indiana and Ohio could be seeing some precipitation moving through on Monday throughout the day, maybe some heavier precipit times. But as we get into parts of Tuesday, we see both systems really try to lift out, and we see that really all we're left with is some lake-enhanced precipitation in through here. As we get into Tuesday afternoon, or Tuesday midday, I should say, into Tuesday evening, here's 5 p.m. and here's about 8 o'clock on Tuesday night. So here is kind of the beginning of the Halloween forecast. Now, it looks like at that point, basically, the folks down here in Texas and maybe up here in Montana might be dealing with some precipitation, as would those folks that are dealing with some lake-enhanced precipitation here. But it looks like a lot of the Corn Belt could have a dry Tuesday evening. But with that dryness, basically, we're going to be seeing higher air pressure moving through, and that's going to take temperatures down pretty chilly. Here's your 8 p.m. temperatures on Tuesday, October 31st, Halloween evening. We can see that almost all of the Corn Belt will be seeing temperatures 40 degrees or below at this point, with some locations here in parts of Minnesota, the Dakotas, Iowa, Wisconsin, well below freezing at this point. So this is going to be a chilly Halloween, thanks in large part to the big trough that's helping produce those two systems as they're moving on off to the north and east. But the thing is if it's cool like this, at this time in October, we expect it. If it's windy, it makes for just downright awful conditions. So let's take a look at what those winds are going to be doing. Here goes an animation for the winds through the next 3.5 days. What I want you to see is as we start this video out, we can see that the Great Plains on Monday are going to be very, very windy. Here's your 6 a.m. winds on Monday. We're already cranking up into the 10, 15, maybe even 20 knot speed here. So we're talking, 20 mile an hour winds moving through this area. And watch as I move through Monday. Kind of very, very brisk conditions here across the northern and western part of the Corn Belt. But as we move into Tuesday, what we see is that by Tuesday, the higher pressure starts to slide in. And then by the time we get into that trick-or-treating time on Tuesday evening, big area of higher atmospheric pressure, basically keeping relatively calm conditions across a big section of the eastern Corn Belt, with really only the stronger winds being placed here in the western Corn Belt. But the good news is, by this point, we're going to be seeing circulation coming around like this rather than from the north. So this won't be, as cold and nasty of as a wind as it could have been by Tuesday evening. So again, we're going to see some really windy conditions in the Great Plains over the next couple of days, but higher pressure moves in by the time trick-or-treating begins, calming the winds down into this area. All right, let's get out of trick-or-treating mode and get into the more impactful weather for the remainder of our harvest. What we always do is we take a look at the pattern. The pattern is the clue for both precipitation and temperature. So let's take a look at what the jet stream's doing. Now, to get us started on Monday, so let's get into about 1 p.m. on Monday. Here is that big broad trough we've seen in the eastern Corn Belt and the eastern kind of Canadian prairies for several days now. And because this has been well established, we've seen a big ridge build into the Gulf of Alaska, bringing some warmer conditions and some nicer weather to the Pacific Northwest. What we're going to be watching throughout much of this week, the first is going to be we're going to have a couple of shortwave troughs move around that big kind of broad area of lower atmospheric heights. Again, that trough, bringing a couple of rounds of precipitation. But we're going to see by the time we get into the end of the week, the pattern shifting a little bit. And what I mean by that is the models have been picking up for the last 3 or 4 days now a pretty consistent picture of a trough building out west. And what that means is as this trough digs out west, we could see some rebounding temperatures across the Corn Belt throughout the week, getting back up into through the 50s and into the 60s for a big section here of the Corn Belt. But with that trough developing out west, yeah, it's going to knock temperatures down there, bring in some precip. But as it goes screaming across the country, this will this will kick off, a pretty serious system through the middle part of the country that we got to be watching out for next weekend. So I'll keep you kind of up to date on that. Also kind of pinpoint where I see this going over the next 2 to 3 weeks into November. So we'll come back to that in a minute. So let's take a look at what temperature looks like kind of day by day. These maps are going to be 24-hour accumulation maps. And we're going to start at noon on Monday and go through noon on Tuesday. We can see that as the systems lift off, really we're just left over with the remnants of that Alberta Clipper and a lot of lake-enhanced precip, which we talked about. By the time we get into Tuesday at noon through Wednesday at noon, I'm watching another Clipper come down as another shortwave comes around that big trough, which means a lot of this precipitation you see here is not going to be getting here until, overnight Tuesday night into early morning Wednesday. But again, we saw the transport of some moisture coming out of the Gulf of Mexico, and this was about the only region we were seeing, some annoying precipitation for trick-or-treating. But this is important to watch because as we get into Wednesday into Thursday, that Alberta Clipper moves over the Great Lakes, continues to draw up moisture, and what this means is Wednesday at noon to Thursday at noon, we're going to be seeing another round of precipitation for the eastern Corn Belt, and that's where we've seen the kind of unrelenting rains, keeping a lot of folks kind of out of fields with, they really want to get in there and consistently get in those fields and get corn out and get those beans out, but the rain has been coming through, so we're seeing the transport of moisture, keeping things wet here. Now, what about Thursday into Friday? By this time, I'm watching another really weak low kind of emerging here into parts of Oklahoma and Texas with a little bit of moisture transport out ahead of it and some of the lingering effects as that front drapes through the eastern part of the Corn Belt here. So, this is overall a little bit drier than you saw on the previous day, but it's not completely dry. Friday into Saturday, that low kind of weakens but moves toward the Ohio River Valley. And I do believe precipitation is overdone here. But what I want you to see is that the models are really just keeping the eastern Corn Belt wet. Now, Saturday, Sundays when the trough builds in out west, and we're going to watch the development of a low pressure center here that's going to move toward the Great Lakes. Now, ahead of it's going to be bringing some moisture transport way up here into the northern plains, potentially bringing some precip into the Dakotas and Minnesota again. This is also going to bring some warmer weather up to the center part of the country as well. But the big kind of unknown here, the models aren't fully settled in on this yet, is how that load begins to develop over the Great Lakes. Because if it does, that's round number 3 of precipitation here for the eastern Corn Belt. So that's important as we're trying to get what's left of that crop out. If we get too much precipitation, it's really going to hamper those harvest efforts. All right, that's why when we watch all of this in aggregate, you see this happening. You see this is the next 10 days of total accumulated precipitation as forecast by the GFS model. And what it really points to is a lot of that eastern Corn Belt precipitation. So keep a very close eye on the forecast in the coming days if you live in these states and you're still trying to get that harvest taken care of. And as we mentioned, it will be cold enough along the northern tier states such that over the next 10 days, with each round that's coming through, we could be seeing more snow piling up in these areas. So we'll keep a close eye on the total accumulated snowfall map with each update. Okay, what are temperatures going to do? Well, Monday starts off pretty chilly here as that shortwave kind of comes through the trough on the backside here, bringing us below freezing temperatures. But what we see is that by the time Tuesday gets here and that trough moves on off to the north and east, watch what happens from Tuesday into Wednesday. We start to see a rebounding in the temperatures across a big section of the Corn Belt. By Thursday, they're really starting to warm up here, warm for this time of year. So we're talking 50s and 60s, maybe some 70s in the far southern region. We keep those really cold temperatures just along the Canadian border as we get into Friday. And Saturday, as the new system develops, we're starting again to bring some warmer air back into a big section of the middle part of our country. So this is going to be a week where our temperatures do try to moderate some, although it's not going to be a really, really warm week ahead. Now, what are we seeing for the second full week of November? Well, let's kind of break the pattern down. Overall, we're probably going to see for that whole second week, a favoring of a trough feature here, kind of over the Intermountain West, with a broader ridge developing here over the eastern part of the country. Now, this does signify some warmer temperatures, but it also means some moisture transport into this area, which is why I'm looking at this area as possibly carrying a wet bias. By the time we get into the third week of November, there's a little bit of uncertainty here. And what I mean is that we may see at times a warmer pattern develop in the center part of the country. The long-range GFS suggests that. But when I look at the overall pattern for that week, November 13th to the 20th, it may favor overall a broader trough across the central part of the country with ridges out west and ridge out east. That shifts the heavier precipitation or the more frequent precipitation toward the east coast. But again, this is Eastern Corn Belt precip. So this is kind of a view of this in terms of what the pattern's going to look like as we look through our November outlook. Again, I don't see the northern tier of our Corn Belt really getting much of a chance to stay much above average, at least for the next, call it 20 to 25 days. So that's kind of your longer range outlook. Now, as we transition toward Brazil, South America, Argentina, I want to show you an event that happened right here. This is in the Argentinian state of Cordoba. They had a series of thunderstorms that went over this location. Remember, we said this was going to be a wet area over the last couple of weeks that dropped an enormous amount of small hail. Yes, that is hail that you're seeing there. Incredible. You've even seen some hail fog in this image. Here's another picture of how the hail piled up again in Cordoba. So this is an important feature to look out for. And one of my colleagues at the University of Illinois is actually right now preparing for a massive field campaign called Relampago that is down there studying these huge severe thunderstorm events that produce hail like this, which has a huge impact on agriculture. But if we just look toward the forecast moving forward here, here's our next 10 days of accumulated precipitation across all of South America. And what we are seeing here is some very, very heavy rains in the southern growing regions of Brazil. So this is Mato Grosso do Sul. We're getting down into Paraná and Rio Grande do Sul, this area. We're seeing the establishment of what's called the South American Convergence Zone, bringing in a lot of precipitation. So this is the monsoon doing what it does this time of year. So we got to keep a close eye on this as we move forward throughout this growing season for South America. And with that, I think I'll wrap up the forecast. We hope you look forward to Agrible's next ag forecast coming out on Thursday. To get morning farm report for your operations, complete with a daily email that shows a snapshot of your field conditions each morning, go to morningfarmreport.com. Sign up for that free account. Full grower accounts are free if you sign up for our Sustainable Yield program or for growers who work with ADM merchandisers. Look forward to talking to you again on Thursday.